Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Linus Kiramat, one of the Kenya Airlift Program GMAT trainers. In this video, we're going to focus on concision. Concision is an aspect that comes into play in the sentence correction section of the GMAT exam. So let's begin. Concision by definition involves making sentences short and clear and expressing them in a way that needs to be said with as few words as possible. So in GMAT, would require you to choose the correct answer choices that are short, comprehensive, and convey meaning in a brief manner as possible. So a sentence that avoids unnecessary verbiage and wordiness is most of the time will be correct. So if you're able to identify one that is short and concise, or concise as we are discussing now, then it's a strong candidate for it being a correct answer choice. Concision comes into play twice. You can either make concision appears or comes in the form of a short, concise answer choice or a short, brief statement, or in some cases, short, brief statements are not do not convey the proper information or all the information that we need to be conveyed out there, right? Or having a very brief statement sometimes would create some ambiguity, and you could have a couple of nouns put together and they're sort of more ambiguous. They're not making communicating as clearly as you would like. So making a statement short, for example, let us look at this case. We have Alexander the Great had a goal of conquering all the countries in the Middle East. All right. So in your normal English speaking or readings, you would not necessarily see if there's a problem in this statement. But if you are given alternatives to this, like for example, Alexander the Great was the conquest. Alexander the Great's goal was the conquest of the Middle East. This conveys similar information as in the first statement, but in a shorter, more precise, more brief, and for a case, in a concise manner, right? But you could have Alexander the Great wanted to conquer the Middle East. This still communicates what statement 1 is all about, but in a shorter, more precise, and brief way. So in GMAT, if you encounter answer choices that are concise, that is, they're short and brief like these two, then go for those answer choices, right? Then GMAT would always prefer active voice form that makes the writing more concise, more clear, more brief, and communicates what is needed with as few words as possible. Let's look at this example here. In the passive form, it says, it has been decided by Jason that he will not attend college. It has been decided by Jason that he will not attend college. This sentence in itself is not wrong, but let us look at an alternative to this statement here in the passive form. So active form, Jason has decided not to attend college. Jason has decided not to attend college. So this is concision in play. These two statements convey the same message, but the active statement, the statement that is in the active form, uses fewer words to communicate the same meaning or the same message or information as in the passive form. So always, if you find an answer choice that is in the active form, GMAT would prefer that over an answer choice that is in the active form, and this statement attests the same, right? Then the alternative form of concision, where you have short answers not necessarily conveying or being the best answer to a particular question. So because short answers sometimes could contain grammatical, logical errors. For example, too many nouns, we could have a situation where you have too many nouns piled together, like pedestrian safety laws, right? This is wrong. This creates ambiguity because you have these three different nouns, and each stands for its own meaning, all right? The correct, so for this statement where you have pedestrian safety laws, you could sort of break down these two all manner of ways, or you can interpret this information in all manner of ways because it is just a bunch of nouns that are piled together. more correctly or more precisely in a way that you could have this statement in a way that communicates what we want our audience to understand. So, laws that keep pedestrians safe. This is a bit longer than this one, but conveys all the information that is needed to a particular audience, right? So this is correct, and too much concision in our case is incorrect, right? Or you could have a second case of omissions. That is, you could have a common words that are omitted in sentences. You could be trying to, for example, to communicate as fast as you can, or trying to be concise so that to avoid being too wordy. In some cases, omitting some words like could create a different a different meaning out of what you're trying to communicate. Let's look at this example. Kenya's GDP is bigger than Uganda. Kenya's GDP is bigger than Uganda, all right? But you could have Kenya's GDP is bigger than that of Uganda. So in the first statement, Kenya's GDP is bigger than Uganda. In our heads, we know that what the author is trying to communicate is Kenya's GDP is bigger than Uganda's GDP. But this, the way that this statement is constructed, is clearly comparing Kenya's GDP to Uganda the country, not Uganda's GDP, right? So correct way of constructing this statement will be Kenya's GDP is bigger than that of Uganda, meaning Kenya's GDP is bigger than Uganda's GDP, all right? So avoid or omitting words like that of, those of, other, and also, because you could end up making wrong comparisons or creating a different meaning out of what we were actually trying to communicate initially.
You are watching Success with Bob Mwiti Show, presented to you by Upstack America. Upstack America is a consulting company that helps immigrants find amazing higher education and job opportunities in the tech industry in the United States. You can find our programs by going to www.upstackamerica.com. Upstack America, we wake you up to the unlimited potential.
So the lesson from this concision class will be, concision is good, a concise statement is good, but too concise is a problem, all right? We have seen particular examples of that. Or be aware of multiple nouns piled together. Two nouns are often fine, but you have three or more nouns, it becomes problematic. It creates a whole new meaning from what we're intending to actually communicate. Right? Then be aware of short answer versions that omit logically necessary words. I believe I have clearly elaborated that. So feel free to pause the video and try out this example, after which you can play and let's tackle it together. So example 1 says, the process of digital remastering is the method by which analog sound recordings are converted to digital files, edited to remove undesirable audio artifacts introduced during analog recording, and filtered to enhance the overall quality of the sound, right? So in this underlined part, we can clearly tell the two words that are used here, the process, right? We have the process, and we have here the method. So these words being used in the same statement or sentence creates a lot of wordiness, all right? So our job is to find a statement that communicates what needs to be communicated with as few words as possible and as briefly and as clearly as possible, right? So A is basically a repetition of that, and by clearly we can tell that these two words it's best we look for an alternative that communicates what needs to be communicated with as few words as possible. So for that, eliminate A. B says, the process of digital remastering is the way that analog sound recordings are converted to digital files. You can really tell two words that are sort of similar. The process is the way. So again, too much wordiness or two words that mean the same. Let's look for an example or an answer choice that conveys this process with one word instead of two, actually, right? So B is out also. C says, digital remastering is the process by which analog sound recordings are converted to digital files. Then the rest of the sentence. So C just uses the process, other than using two words like the process, the way, or in the initial case, the process and the method. So for that, C is a strong candidate for correct answer. So we could leave that for the moment and examine the other two answer choices that are left. D says, digital remastering occurs when analog sound recordings are converted to digital files, then edited to remove undesirable audio artifacts introduced during analog recording and filtered to enhance the overall quality of the sound. This answer choice almost sounds correct, but I feel like it's changing the meaning of what the author intended, because we from after digital remastering can see that the word occurs is used here instead of a process or a method. And from what we are being communicated or being informed here, the digital remastering is a process, not really an occurrence, okay? So for that reason, I feel like this changes the whole meaning of what the initial statement was. So eliminate D. He says, digital remastering, the process by which analog sound recordings are converted to digital files. Then, yeah. So this, the use of this comma here sort of separates or separates this digital remastering from the rest of the sentence. And furthermore, the other commas that follow this statement, so this also creates ambiguity and sort of doesn't creates, the statement is not compact and it does not communicate as well as we'd like. So net E. The correct answer for this example is C, which says digital remastering is a process by which analog sound recordings are converted to digital files. This statement is concise, it is brief, it is not as wordy as the others, and it doesn't really change the meaning of the initial statement. So for that reason, C is correct. Okay. Let's look at example 2. Example 2 says, although amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, typically causes death within 3 to 5 years of the onset of symptoms, on average, the famous physicist Stephen Hawking has defied the odds, in contrast, by living more than 40 years after his initial diagnosis. Now, we can tell that this statement has quite a number of commas. We have a comma after symptoms, then on average, all right, and then after odds, then in contrast. We can tell that there's some sort of there's something that the author is trying to communicate to us, or the examiner, but the inclusion of these contrast words on average, in this case, no, in contrast, then on average, I think we should look for an example or answer choice that eliminates this wordiness and gives or communicates to us as briefly as possible or in a concise manner, right? So it basically repeats what's underlined there, and from what you can tell, this doesn't sound correct. So eliminate A. B says, or ALS causes death within 3 to 5 years of the onset of the symptoms. On average, the famous physicist Stephen Hawking has defied the odds, in contrast, by living more than 40 years after his initial diagnosis. This also just uses a similar construction we have in contrast. Then on average, feel too much wordiness here, so eliminate C. Eliminate B, sorry. C says typically causes death within 3 to 5 years of the onset of the symptoms. The famous physicist Stephen Hawking has defied the odds by living more than 40 years after his initial diagnosis. This eliminates the wordiness, the use of on average, in contrast, by it introduces a new word, typically, which by definition could mean on average, because it's a regular occurrence, and typically could come in place of average, all right? So typically causes death within 3 to 5 years of the onset of the symptoms. Then the famous physicist has defied the odds by living more than 40 years after his initial diagnosis. So you could also tell the use of defy the odds. You could use it in place of in contrast, and then instead of, now this defy the odds, you can tell that is attached to the to the sentence, all right? It's not like separated by commas, and this is sort of make the statement more compact and communicates more briefly and directly. Then D says causes death within 3 to 5 years of the average onset of symptoms. The famous physicist Stephen Hawking has defied the odds. By contrast, by leaving, right, you can tell by contrast is not correct, so eliminate D. He says typically causes death within 3 to 5 years of the average onset of symptoms. The famous physicist Stephen Hawking has defied the odds by living more than 40 years after initial diagnosis. Now, this answer choice has typically and on average, which is sort of conveying a similar meaning. So for that reason, eliminate E. Correct answer to this is to this example is C, which says typically causes death within 3 to 5 years of the onset of the symptoms. The famous physicist Stephen Hawking has defied the odds by living more than 40 years after his initial diagnosis. All right, so that in our case is correct, and we go with that. It's brief, concise, and communicates what we want with as few words as possible. So with that, we've come to the end of this video. Kindly join us in our training sessions. We'll elaborate these concepts and more. Thank you.